Captain James Rodriguez had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years. Every single flight, before entering the cockpit, he touched the small medal of the Virgin Mary pinned inside his uniform pocket. A gift from his grandmother on the day he got his pilot's license, worn smooth by decades of his fingers tracing its edges. December 24, 2019. Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Flight 2847 to Miami was fully booked, 198 passengers plus crew, families heading south for Christmas, children pressed against terminal windows watching snow fall. James completed his pre-flight inspection methodically, the same routine he'd performed thousands of times. The Boeing 737 was in perfect condition. Mechanics had signed off. Weather was clear enough for departure. Co-pilot Sarah Chen reviewed the flight plan beside him. Everything was normal. Everything was ready. James settled into the captain's seat at 6:47 p.m. They were scheduled for a 7:15 departure. He reached for his medal as always, that small gesture of faith before every journey. But this time, when his fingers touched the medal, something happened. A voice, not through the headset, not external, inside his mind, but somehow completely distinct from his own thoughts. Gentle, feminine, absolutely clear. Not this flight, James, not tonight. He froze. His hand remained on the medal. Sarah was running through the checklist, her voice distant. The voice came again, more insistent. You must not fly. Trust me, my son. Do not take off. James felt his heart hammering. He looked at Sarah, who was waiting for his response to a checklist item. The instrument panel showed green across the board. Outside, ground crew signaled ready. Passengers were settled, seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants had completed safety demonstrations. Not this flight. The voice echoed in his mind. This was insane. He was a rational man, a professional with an impeccable safety record, but the voice was undeniable, and it carried the same peace he felt when praying the rosary his grandmother taught him. Sarah, he heard himself say, I need you to call maintenance. She turned, confused. What's wrong? How could he explain? I have a feeling. Something's not right. Sarah's expression shifted to concern. In aviation, you never ignore a pilot's instinct. What did you notice? James hadn't noticed anything. Every gauge was normal, but he couldn't shake the overwhelming certainty. I don't know yet, but we're not flying until I'm sure this aircraft is safe. The decision cascaded. Maintenance was called back. Passengers grew restless as the delay was announced. Gate agents handled complaints. James stood firm, re-inspecting everything himself. The landing gear, the engines, the hydraulics. Nothing appeared wrong. An hour passed. The airline's operations manager arrived, frustrated. Captain Rodriguez, we need a specific mechanical issue to justify this delay. What exactly are you reporting? James Damoshanoddi met his eyes. I'm reporting that I will not fly this aircraft tonight until it's been thoroughly re-inspected. His job, his reputation, hung in the balance, but the voice had been so clear. By 9 p.m., 3 senior mechanics were examining the aircraft with unusual thoroughness. Passengers had been offered rebooking options. Some had accepted, angry about missing Christmas Eve plans. Others waited, trusting the delay meant their safety. James stood on the tarmac, watching, praying silently. The metal was warm in his hand. He had explained nothing to anyone except that his instinct told him something was wrong. Sarah stayed by his side, loyal, despite not understanding. Then, at 9:34 p.m., Chief Mechanic Robert Torres emerged from beneath the aircraft. His face was gray. Captain Rodriguez, you need to see this. They descended into the landing gear compartment. Robert pointed his flashlight at a hydraulic line. See this? Microfracture, nearly invisible. It wouldn't show on standard inspection. James leaned closer. A hairline crack, so small he could barely see it. If you'd taken off, Robert's voice was shaking. The pressure changes at altitude, the stress of landing. This line would have failed. You'd have lost primary hydraulic systems. With the weight of a full passenger load, trying to land without proper hydraulics. He didn't finish. James felt his legs weaken. Sarah grabbed his arm. How did you know? She whispered. He couldn't answer. The crack was in a location that wouldn't be checked except during major maintenance. There was no possible way he could have known. No rational explanation. Robert called the FAA immediately. Other aircraft of the same age and model were grounded for emergency inspections. 2 more planes were found with similar fractures. The passengers were gathered in the terminal at 11 p.m. Most of the anger had transformed into confusion and curiosity. James stood before them, still in his uniform, still holding the medal in his pocket. "I owe you all an explanation," he began. "This evening, I made a decision that delayed your flight and disrupted your Christmas Eve. I did this because—" He paused. How much should he say? "Because I had an overwhelming certainty that something was wrong with that aircraft." A woman in the front row spoke up. "They told us you found a crack, that we would have crashed." James nodded slowly. "The mechanics found a critical failure point. If we had flown tonight, there's a very high probability we would not have survived landing." Silence filled the terminal. A child asked his mother, "The pilot saved us?" The woman looked at James with tears in her eyes. "How did you know?" "They said the crack was invisible." James reached into his pocket and pulled out the small medal. It caught the terminal lights, gleaming. "My grandmother gave me this 22 years ago. She told me the Virgin Mary would always protect me. Tonight, when I touched this medal before takeoff, I heard a voice tell me not to fly. I've never experienced anything like it. I don't expect everyone to understand or believe, but I knew with absolute certainty that I could not take that plane into the sky." Some passengers crossed themselves, others wiped tears. A priest traveling to Miami stood and approached James. "Captain, today is the vigil of our Lord's birth. What you experienced, what you trusted, saved 200 lives. That is nothing short of a miracle." Flight 2847 departed the next morning on a different aircraft. James flew it himself. As they lifted off into Christmas morning sunshine, every passenger applauded. Several had asked to take photos with him. Others simply touched his shoulder as they boarded. Wordless gratitude. Years later, James still flies. The medal remains in his pocket, more precious than ever. He never heard the voice again, but he didn't need to. That single moment of divine intervention, that Christmas Eve when faith overruled logic and saved 200 souls, was enough for a lifetime. The FAA investigation revealed that the fracture pattern affected an entire production series. James's refusal to fly led to a fleet-wide safety directive that likely prevented multiple catastrophic failures. When investigators asked how he detected something no instrument could measure, James simply showed them the medal. "Sometimes," he told them, "we're given knowledge we cannot explain, and when that happens, the only rational thing to do is trust it." The aircraft he refused to fly was repaired and returned to service, but James never flew that particular plane again. Every time he sees it at the gate, he touches his medal and whispers a prayer of thanks. 200 people went home to their families that Christmas. 200 lives continued because one pilot listened to a voice only he could hear. In the terminal that night, as passengers finally departed on other flights, many stopped at the airport chapel. They lit candles, said prayers, and thanked the Virgin Mary for watching over a faithful pilot who chose belief over logic, faith over fear. And every Christmas Eve since, James attends midnight mass, the medal pinned over his heart, grateful for the grandmother who gave him faith and for the voice that saved so many when it mattered most.